The 5 roles of League feature constant shifts in the meta with champions entering and falling out of relevance all throughout the year. Even so, there's a number of them who consistently find employment. Aatrox, Darius, Malphite in top lane, Lee Sin, Graves, Kayn in the jungle, Akali, Zed, Xylas in the mid lane, Blitzcrank, Senna, Nautilus in support. ADC is a different story though. The way Riot likes to go about bot lane is more cyclical in nature. At any given point, there are usually 3 or 4 dominant marksmen from which players are expected to go, and typically they try to fairly distribute popularity across all of them. So it's exceedingly rare for any one marksman to perennially be unpopular, which is why Kog'Maw and Kalista are special cases in this regard. Another marksman, if we can even call her one, that's been struggling to join the rotation is Nila, who's been out for just shy of 2 years and has practically never been meta despite having a pretty solid win rate. Some might be quick to write off her lack of representation as her just being gimmicky, and while that does play a big role, there's a lot more beneath the surface that I think is worth talking about, since there are plenty of gimmicky AD carries, yet they happen to fare much better than her. For today's episode of Why No One Plays, we'll be talking about Nila, the Joy Unbound. Unlike the 2 solo lanes top and mid, bot lane's 2v2 environment fosters a sub-meta within the overall meta itself that greatly affects one's experiences from one game to the next, even if it's the exact same 2 marksmen for every single one. The presence of an additional champion, the support, changes everything about the game, from matchups to lane macro, and even as you transition from early to mid and eventually late game. While top and mid players can more often than not credit their success or failure to individual factors such as matchups and player skill, with the obvious exception of jungle intervention, winning bot lane is a team effort whether ADC and support players like it or not. On paper, the balanced team makes an effort to ensure every marksman is holistically compatible with every support in some capacity, usually by having supports enable them through universal ways, shielding and healing to increase their combat resilience or providing crowd control and damage to increase their combat pressure. Either way, while there are pairs that perform quite well with each other, Lucian Nami, Kalista Thresh, Samira Nautilus and so on, by and large, every ADC is meant to work with every support to a certain extent. In addition to what your support is capable of, it's also imperative to consider the enemy support, who will be doing everything in their power to shut you down the same way your support is trying to shut down their ADC. Actually, more often than not, bot laners tend to show greater concern over the enemy support than the ADC, as evident by the prevailing narrative that laning phase is decided by the support. What differentiates bot laners like Nila and Samira from other supports is that exact principle, enemy support. The majority of marksmen are more concerned about who the enemy support will be. For example, Ezreal players don't really care much about Blitzcrank thanks to Arcane Shift, diminishing the threat of Rocket Grab. Sivir doesn't get too intimidated by Morgana because she has Spell Shield. On the other hand, Twitch players pee their pants if the enemy team insta-locks Pyke or Braum, or Vayne players cringe when they have to face any poke support like Zyra or Karma. Nila and Samira, however, care less about who the enemy support is, at least relative to their peers. Normally, what determines if they get through laning phase easily or not is who their support is. Samira very much prefers to have an engaged support like Nautilus, Pyke or Rell to set her up for an all-in combo, but being technically still classified as a ranged champion, she can get by with an enchanter or backline support even if it's not the most ideal for her. Nila is a different story however. She's exclusively melee even with Formless Blade granting bonus attack range, making her the first true melee bot laner in the game, as champs like Yasuo or the very old Mordekaiser bot lane never really took off as a staple thing. To offset the expectedly weaker neutral game, she was given a few concessions to mitigate the pressure difference in lane through her passive. Joy Unending would grant bonus experience to herself and the nearest allied champion. By my estimate, that would be an increased rate of 1.2 to 1.3 times, don't quote me on that. The second effect is that she would get bonus healing and shielding while giving bonus healing and shielding whenever either was given to her or an allied champion. The premise of her passive was to account for the fact that she can get zoned off minions more easily than other marksmen and that she would naturally take more damage due to being outranged against most enemies. This is further supplemented by the passive on Formless Blade, affording combat sustain to her when damaging enemy champions. Though it's a very nice passive to have on a champion with their playstyle, it creates a central problem of her gameplay being unlike anything bot lane has ever seen. Marksmen have become increasingly more inventive and creative since entering the quote-unquote modern era of League, which I would say began in late Season 4 with the release of Kalista. Kai'Sa, Kalista, Jhin, Zarya, Phelios, despite their vastly novel experiences compared to older marksmen, were still digestible by ADC mains. Nila is a bot laner, but she's not a marksman. Her design is so radically different from the class that it's almost mutually exclusive, in that you have to completely relearn bot lane through a different viewpoint, with many of its aspects contradicting what you conventionally know. Not only do you have to reassess what you can and can't do versus the enemy ADC, but also the support. It would be almost like playing Fiora, Gwen, or Tryndamere down in bot lane, because Nila's a lot more reminiscent of those champions than she is to any marksman. Thing is, barring instances where you get autofilled, ADC players can go years without ever having touched a Skirmisher. They only see and know the game through ranged auto attackers like Caitlyn, Ezreal, Lucian, Kai'Sa and stuff. Some marksmen are more aggressive in your face, but the range of their strengths and weaknesses are all close to each other, whereas you can't take that same foundation and apply it to Nila. This makes her very difficult to pick up, not because she's difficult, but because she's intended to be played in a role that has never witnessed a champion like her before. There's absolutely nothing in her kit that remotely resembles other marksmen. The easiest way for a player to pick up a new champion in League is to take their existing knowledge of champs they've played already and try to associate things together. It's the whole reason why there are classes in this game, to draw points of similarity. Even if they have very different abilities, you can take the fundamentals you learn from one champion and apply it, or at least try to apply it, to another. Darius players can take what they know and transfer it to Mordekaiser. Kindred players can take what they know and transfer it to Graves. Annie players can take what they know and apply it to Syndra. There's always something you can find that links two champions together to make them easier to pick up and learn. When someone has nothing that links them together with other members of that group, the player has to put in the extra effort to learn and understand the nuances and quirks of that champion, consequently resulting in more losses than wins, as they have yet to grasp where and when they're at their strongest and weakest. Few players, if any, are willing to power through that initial hurdle for a champion, especially when that same effort can be put into a normal champion, only they achieve results immediately. Champions like Singed, Heimerdinger, Yorick, and Oldesol were and are unpopular because they're nothing like other champions, and the payoff for learning them is not big enough to justify the investment. Nila may have a more intuitive kit, but the environment you play her in makes her unintuitive. She is first and foremost a skirmisher. Skirmishers are typically played top, jungle, and mid. If you look at her moveset, I'm sure most top jungle and mid laners can get the hang of her rather quickly, but she's not designed to fly solo. She's explicitly meant to be played bot lane and only bot lane. If she were to go toe to toe with other top or mid laners, she would get destroyed. Now before you think, oh, that means top laners who get autofilled can pick Nila. Nope, not a good idea. Solo laners are not used to fighting two opponents at the same time. Additionally, they're used to skirmishers being independent. Fiora, Riven, Gwen, Tryndamere, Jax. Nila may be characterized as a skirmisher, but she's not the same as them. The reason for that is, despite being melee, she's balanced as if she's ranged. Nila has one of the weakest laning phases in all of League due to the fact that she's treated like a marksman. Melee champions on average are stronger than ranged champs in terms of base stats and whatnot out of consideration for their weaker neutral game. Ranged champions are squishier, have less base damage and whatnot since they have the privilege of safety by virtue of having range. Base stat wise, Nila has melee champion stats, but ability wise, she has ranged champion stats. Formless Blade in concept is one of the most overpowered abilities in the game. Low mana cost, 4-second cooldown gives passive armor penetration, passive combat sustain with overflow shielding, AoE physical damage that can apply lifesteal, bonus attack range, and bonus attack speed. The bulk of its scaling, however, comes from crit chance, so you're not going to reach the full effects until 5 items, or in other words full build. That's partly why Yasuo and Yone get 2.5 times crit chance and Tryndamere gets free crit, because melee champions have to power spike faster. Nila doesn't get free crit stats though. That's why early game her Q autos feel like they do nothing, but then late game she rips you apart. Formless Blade scales exponentially in damage, not additively. Compared to other DPS abilities though, which usually only need rank 5 and maybe 1 or 2 items, Nila's Q scales over the course of the entire game. Jubilant Veil, same thing. It has an exceedingly long cooldown, but it goes from being a rather inconsequential ability to one of the most game-changing. Realistically, in the early game, you're only gonna block 1 or 2 auto attacks as no one has attack speed yet, and you're only being attacked by 1 person or 2. But then late game, when you're in team fights, you're being attacked by 5 champions, not 2. You're giving this effect to your teammates who can also block theoretically limitless basic attacks, and the mana cost goes to 0. Jubilant Veil's efficiency fluctuates a lot more than Jax's Counter-Strike because it has no fixed value. Counter-Strike is guaranteed value, the damage and stun, plus it has a lower cooldown, but that's to account for it only affecting him. Point being, Nila takes time to get going, just like other marksmen, but she's a melee champion, making her the bot laner most reliant on her support to get her through laning phase. It's not like other marksmen who have a preference for certain supports. Nila has a dependence on them. She literally cannot function without the right support. I'm not implying she's unable to win laning phase and needs to hold the L for 20 minutes, but it's extremely dependent on whether Nila knows her avenues and windows of attack, and more importantly, whether her support knows it too. Just as ADC players have spent their entire league career playing marksmen, support players have also spent their entire career playing alongside them. So when they suddenly have an ADC who's a melee ranged attacker, the majority of them have no idea how to play around her, exacerbating the poor first impression people have of her, since even if you get the hang of Nila's strange gameplay, that doesn't always guarantee you'll match with a support who does as well. For starters, in some games Nila doesn't even have a passive. I mean, she has the experience thing, but the other part with the healing and shielding does not work off her own sustain. It only works from sustain provided by her team. So if you have a team consisting of Ornn, Sejuani, Syndra, and Leona, it's a fantastic team, but you practically don't have a passive. She needs that passive to compensate for her early game deficiencies. When she's with a good support pair like Seraphine, Taric, Rakan, her win rate goes up to like 55%, possibly 60%. But when she's with a Braum, Zyra, Ashe, Brand, Xerath, her win rate can drop below 45%. That's how much it matters. Furthermore, as a melee champion, Nila is more susceptible to matchups than other marksmen. ADCs like Vayne and Twitch might have a tough time against Draven and Misfortune, but they can at least fall back on playing safe and farming as best they can with their range. Nila, on the other hand, can get bullied and zoned off minions really easily, hence why they give her the bonus XP thing on her passive. Even Riot's aware how vulnerable she is. This places even more burden on her support to pick up the slack, cause it's gonna be a very long game. In recent years, the Balance team has attempted to give every ADC a breakpoint of 3 items. By 3 items, most marksmen start contributing meaningful pressure. Assuming they're keeping in pace, that should be around the 25-minute mark. That is, unless your name is Draven. Nila's breakpoint's a bit later. She's not just a late game carry, she's a hyper carry. At full build, Nila might be in the top 10 strongest champions in the game. She can 3-shot basically everyone, even tanks and bruisers, because with their passive combined with LDR, that's over 50% armor penetration. She also has like 50% lifesteal from Bloodthirster, Shield Bow, and her battle healing. Her Q counts as ability damage, so it gets empowered by Quick Blades. She gets unconditional 25% magic damage reduction on her W, not to mention the basic attack dodges that come with it. She has 2 free target dashes, and while I haven't gone over Apotheosis yet, she has that too. A massive AoE wombo combo ultimate with a huge heal attached to it. If she's accompanied by Taric or Sona, she becomes virtually unbeatable. More damage than even the highest DPS champs in the game. That's how strong she is at 6 items. If, and I emphasize if, she gets to 6 items. Once again, to be clear, I'm not saying Nila can't start getting stuff done at earlier stages, but by design, she was meant to be a super 1v9 late game carry just by looking at her abilities and the empirical data we have of her. But for her to get to that point, so much has to go right for her. The player needs to mentally adjust to how different she is to play. Her support needs to mentally adjust to how different she is to play, as well as pick a champion that can help her survive the laning phase as best she can. She has to pray that the enemy bot lane doesn't pick a horrendous counter like double poke damage, and she reaches her breakpoint later than any other bot laner in the game, so she has to pray for a longer game. If any of these are compromised, the chances of victory on Nila drop significantly. It's too inconsistent for it to be worth it, and the sad thing is, it is worth it. The reward you get for mastering Nila is just incredible. It's not one of those things where you have to work twice as hard for the same reward. The payoff for mastering Nila is a higher ceiling than what you can achieve on other marksmen. The issue is, you have no agency on the matter. Even if you get the hang of her unorthodox moveset, you have to pray that your support knows the pair dynamic as well. A vicious cycle where Nila being unpopular makes it so few supports, if any, truly know how to play with her, making her seem weaker than she actually is, thus making her be played less, thus making it more and more unlikely for supports to know how to play around her. With all these restrictions in mind, I think that might explain why Nila has such a high duo presence. Chances are, most of the time when you run across the Nila in your games, the player is either griefing by first timing her for fun, or they're duoing with their support. I don't think there are that many solo Nila one-tricks out there. It just isn't sustainable. I know this is anecdotal, but whenever I check a Nila player's OP.gg, they're usually duo smurfing with a Taric, Rakan, or some other enchanter support. That's the only way you can consistently find success on her. There is just too much that can go wrong as a solo Nila player. I think she's going to remain a niche pick for the rest of her life. Unless they give her a new passive and flatten the curve on her scaling, there's no way she'll ever become meta. Nila's a fish out of water, a champion attempting to be something that she physically can't. What do you guys think though? Do you believe there's a possibility for her to be meta, or is she forever relegated to a pocket pick? Let me know in the comments down below. For now, if you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you could leave a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other Why No One Plays episodes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.